day 4 of playing the bass. I didn't film the first 3 because I wasn't even thinking about it at all. I put on some jazz music, of course, and I was just kind of like, that was actually pretty good. Again, with the bass, I'm not really going to try to use any sort of teaching or learning technique. I'm just all by ear. I'm really intimidated by the amount of neck that's still available beyond those first few notes, but I do feel pretty good about the fact that in a few days of playing, really like 2 days where all I did was mess around, make faces, because obviously if you make the right faces and you do the right hand movements, it's going to sound good. And I'm playing all. And just like BS. Pretend that all the quarter tones are intentional, and then just slide up or down till it sounds right. That was not a note, but that was. I think that's the 4th. Let's see. Oof. So if this bass is still in tune, that's the 4th. Try to throw in some double strings. See? If you act really confident, you could maybe convince people that you can actually play an instrument after just a few days. Never mind that half those notes are not actual notes. I mean, they're notes, but they're not in the Western scale. Right, and that's kind of what I'm aiming to do with every instrument that I want to learn. So there it is with the bass. Today I've already played drums, and that's how I've been learning the drums, is just like sit down at the kit. I'm not saying it's working well. I am saying that I play drums at least a little bit better today than the first day I started. It may not be the most efficient process. Really intentional study and learning, and working on specific riffs and getting them right and learning riffs like that would result in faster progress for sure. Maybe not for sure. because this is a whole different technique in the way it comes together. Saxophone, I think I really got it right and was forced to get it right by being in school, where I was forced to go through learning the notes one at a time in the painstaking process of G, A, B, A, G, and like just had to learn to read written music because it was how we learned in school. But then I'd go home and I wouldn't practice that. I'd just practice like I just put on jazz and try to catch a few of the notes that they're playing and the rhythms especially, and the phrasing, because in so many senses that's more important than the actual notes, because really you're just like maybe starting on know what note you want to land on, and then the phrase in between that can be so fluid and flexible, and you're creating um, a feeling more than like a specific array of notes. So I really think there's something to be said for just messing around, but and that's kind of why I'm documenting the process, because like I realize that the videos and the shorts that I post are generally not going to be that great. Like there'll be a few good moments, maybe a few couple good licks on the drums or on the bass, but in general, like it's not going to sound great. Um, there's going to be a bunch of just weird random notes, but the whole time, like I really believe that there's the intentional process of listening carefully and finding the note and getting a feel for exactly where that note is. And then there's also like the process that happens subconsciously. And I think so much of the time that gets cut out of the process because we don't believe that there's any value in just messing around. Um, but I think that our brains, even on a level that we don't understand, are constantly analyzing and figuring things out and like catching that one good note that you played or that one good series of notes or just the way that worked out. And you're like, but I could never replicate it because I was just going like this. It's like, you don't know that. Like, your brain may have tied that motion that felt random, felt unintentional. Um, it may have connected that motion to that sound, and it will know when to repeat that because you want to hear that sound in the specific context of the music that you're playing with. And I really believe that's a real thing. Um, and so that's kind of how I approach saxophone. And then I went from really not being like, I struggled with saxophone. It was not natural for me. I was not first chair initially, but eventually I was. And even though my ability to read music was still behind, where some of my classmates were not necessarily the saxophonists, because we weren't necessarily the brightest bunch of students in general, but um, there were definitely clarinetists and flautists and bassoonists and basically every other instrument besides saxophone who could probably outread me with reading music, at least in high school. And but there was I was known as the person who could improvise and the person who would get all the solos in the jazz songs. Um, and not saying that I was perfect there either. Like I I didn't understand a lot about music theory then, and I couldn't follow changes, or if I did follow changes, it was all by ear. Um, and the more that I tried to read the changes, the more I just got lost. And I really had to kind of go out on a limb and trust my ear and trust my intuition, um, when I was playing jazz solos, especially in high school. But like on the flip side of that, there's the fear that you can lose that if you focus too much on only reading. And it's kind of like, when it does come together and you don't know how you did it, it feels like magic. And you're like, would I be able to create that magic if I knew all of the theory and I was just, making rational decisions about what to play based on the theory? Like, would I lose those magic moments where this perfect thing that's not necessarily in line with the theory um, just comes out? And I think the answer is like, you can't be afraid to get better in any way that you do it. So like, you can't be afraid to get better at reading music. You can't be afraid to get better at um, improvising with, from a place of what feels like total intuition, or just practice, just exposure and experience, um, or where you don't even know exactly where those notes are coming from, how you're making those decisions on the fly. Um, and so you never want to avoid the opportunity to practice in one way for fear that it might affect your ability to do something in another way. Like, for a while, I was kind of afraid to learn to read music to a certain extent, because I thought it would impact my ability to just throw something out there on the fly, um, spontaneously. But it's just a matter of practicing both, and whatever you practice, you will get better at. So I practice almost with saxophones, at least the one where I set that precedent of learning it from multiple directions. Um, and not that I've practiced saxophone in a really long time, anyways. But back when I was practicing saxophone, like 10 plus years ago, I would try sometimes to practice without thinking, without making conscious decisions. Like, so I was actually practicing the process of playing intuitively, because I would intentionally not think about the changes, not even look at the changes, not necessarily even know what they were. And then I would also practice where I focused very much on the changes and was only trying to play making rational decisions. And it's like, I think that both ways of approaching it helped me in the other way. Because the more I made those intentional, focused, rational decisions and became able to follow along with the chords that change very quickly sometimes in jazz, um, I think that gave me a lot of material to pull from when I was just playing around. And then vice versa, when I was just playing around, I got the notes under my fingers, like the physical mechanics of it and everything else, just got that to flow. And then I could bring that, and not even bring it, because it would just come out on its own. Like, once you have something, it's gonna come out on its own. So when I was making those, watching the chord changes, trying to follow along, but without me trying and without me focusing on it, and with me actually trying to focus 100% of my energy on something else, that ability to just move fingers across the keys more fluidly would still come out. So that's my really long-winded rant on why I approach learning music the way that I do. I don't feel like I have a lot to show for it, but I also haven't spent very much time at all, relative to the amount of time I've had in my life to potentially spend learning music. I spent a tiny portion of it actually learning music. I've honestly barely played music since college, and even then I've actually played a lot less than the supposed average. I don't know if I don't know if the average music student was actually practicing 6 hours a day. I know I definitely wasn't. Um, but I do think that what I did have going for me is that when I did practice, I would get totally lost and totally absorbed in it and give it 100% of my focus and attention. Um, and I think that, that's part of my theory here, why I'm practicing the way I am, just picking up an instrument for like 5 minutes and putting it back away. Because I feel like if I'm consistent with that and I pick up every instrument that I want to learn how to play for just 5 minutes a day, and just totally commit and totally give myself permission to get totally lost in that process, then I will totally get better at playing that instrument. Um, and I think that applies to everything. Like, 5 minutes of really intense focus is better than half an hour without it. So that's my theory. Let's end the video.